commentary? Like, who is the audience?
Most of the audience in the room is going to be much more technical people, scientific researchers, biomedical informatics, but also people online. And then there's a lot of implication on a lot of people who like build and evaluate AI systems, but in broader sense, one of the implications is medical applications and education.
And Stanford versus outside of Stanford.
This is mostly advertised to Stanford, but in theory, we've had people around the world log in.
Okay, I'm going to be okay with that.
Sometimes, not often, but they can. They're usually busy eating lunch anyway, so I don't see students logging in that often, but there can be. So I wouldn't say anything derogatory about students, but
Ours are out right now. And if they saw us presenting, they might show up.
Okay.
So we'll do
I'm gonna swap over because we're pretty much at time at noon. I can see people are starting to log in. If you haven't already, you might want to grab some lunch, grab a drink. All right, folks, we're gonna like to find out more info about ongoing educational sessions or other things going on in the division. You can scan the QR code on the left. Very specifically on the right, there's going to be a dedicated afternoon symposium as part of Stanford's AI week on Wednesday afternoon. That will take you to the registration link if you'd like to attend in person, although also available virtually. We should be having a fun dynamic discussion with multiple presenters today. While people are grabbing their food, sitting down and logging in, I'm gonna do a couple brief intro video that I think is pretty fun and sets kind of the stage. Y'all might have heard about this one early on in the ChatGPT era. Some professor said, I think my students are using AI to write their papers. So he used ChatGPT to read those papers and ask it, did it write those papers? And apparently it said yes most of the time, so he failed all of his students. So for one thing, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't actually tell you the difference. And very ironic that he used AI to accuse his students of using AI. Chaos ensues. But this is a relatively recent story. Apparently the first time a PhD student has been expelled from a program and he is suing his university because they've accused him for using AI assignments. What is the world we're living in and how do we protect academic integrity? I'm gonna let this play for it's about 6 minutes and then we'll dive into our actual live presenters. Just give a chance for people to log in and sit down.
He is believed to be the first student to be expelled from the U accused of using AI to cheat. He's not only denying it, he's suing, and people are watching to see what happens. Chris Horapsky breaks down the case that could have widespread implications.
In August 2024, U of M grad student Haishan Yang was on a trip in Morocco, remotely working on his second PhD. The final step before writing his thesis, passing a preliminary exam. He had 8 hours to answer 3 essay questions. The test said he could use notes, reports, and books from class, but explicitly said no artificial intelligence.
What did you think? Do you think you did well?
I think I did perfect. I was very happy.
Weeks later, he'd get an email telling him he failed, accused by the grading professors of using an AI program like ChatGPT. The university held a student conduct review hearing, a small trial of sorts.
Here we lay out the evidence on both sides.
Yang let us review all the information the 4 professors used, all of them concluding they had significant concerns the paper was not written in Yang's voice and involved concepts not covered in class. When the professors entered the exam into ChatGPT and compared those answers to Yang's, they found certain parts matched in both structure and language. They cited these headlines and these bullet points as suspicious. Professor Peter Hugfeld wrote, I was struck by the similarities between the two that seemed extremely unlikely to be coincidental. In one answer, Yang used the acronym PCO, which stands for Primary Care Organization. Even though Yang contends the acronym shows up in established journals, all 4 professors said none of them in their careers had ever seen that acronym before. Where else does it appear? They say they found it in ChatGPT's answers. And then there's this, an earlier accusation Yang used AI. On a homework assignment he turned in, Professor Susan Mason says one paragraph ended with a note to self that read, quote, "Rewrite it, make it more casual, like a foreign student write, but no AI." In a letter to Community Standards, Mason said she strongly suspected Yang was using AI. Yang admitted he used it to check his English, but denied using it for answers on the assignment. Ultimately, he received a warning from the U.
That was the bulk of evidence used against Yang. Here's his take.
Did you use ChatGPT for the test?
I did not use ChatGPT in the test.
Instead, Yang believes certain professors were out to get him, alleging one professor altered the evidence to make him look guilty.
Do you think that this was a conspiracy amongst the professors against you personally?
My advisor, Brandao, certainly believes so, and
What do you believe?
I believe so too.
Why would Yang believe that? About a year before the exam, records show the university cut Yang's financial support after claims of poor performance and disparaging behavior as a research assistant.
And the graduate director told me in person that I should consider to quit.
Yang appealed with support from his advisor, who called the way Yang was being treated by the department an embarrassment. The U apologized and agreed to restore his funding if Yang agreed not to sue. So how does this play into Yang's new dispute over AI? Well, he gives two reasons why he believes ChatGPT's answers were similar to his. First, ChatGPT is trained off the same books and reports that he studies from.
What does it mean? It means my answer probably similar to hundreds of thousands, millions of papers ChatGPT absorbed.
Second, he says the exam answers seemed close because he believes one of the professors altered them. Yang discovered differences between the ChatGPT answers submitted at this hearing and the ones originally shared between the professors. Comparing the two versions, you can see fonts were changed and some paragraphs omitted. He believes one professor was re-asking ChatGPT, hoping to get a closer match to his answers.
Apparently, you generate two ChatGPT answers, and you didn't claim it. So they generate two versions, but they only attach one version. And then this raises ethical question. They can keep generating, and they generate some version. Oh, wow, it's more similar.
Yang's advisor, Brian Dowd, wrote a letter in Yang's defense, calling him, quote, the best read student he'd ever encountered. He called the evidence against Yang inconclusive, and to the panel wrote, quote, in over 4 decades in our division, I never have seen this level of animosity directed at a student. I have no explanation for that animosity.
So how did the U's mini trial end? After listening to all the evidence, the 5-member panel decided unanimously that Yang, more likely than not, cheated. For that, he was expelled from the university, and with it, a cancellation of his student visa, allowing him into the country. In January, Yang filed state and federal lawsuits against one of the professors and others at the university, alleging altered evidence and a lack of due process. Yang says he did use ChatGPT to help him file those lawsuits.
Oh, the
All right, gotta set the stage of some things we're thinking about. We're gonna start with some additional opening remarks. Dr. Fuller, you want to go ahead and actually, can you also briefly introduce yourself and dive in, and we're gonna have a panel swap over for a presentation phase, but go ahead.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm Rebecca Miller-Kuhlmann. I'm a neurologist clinically. I'm here in my capacity as the assistant dean for the pre-clerkship space of the MD program. So the first 2 years of our classroom space. And the couple remarks and anecdotes I wanted to share before turning it over to our wonderful MSPA colleagues and their very scholarly work and approach to this are just some of the ways that we're considering and some of the things we've experienced just in this early time with how we navigate academic integrity with this changing landscape. So one example, in a lot of our courses, we previously had closed book multiple choice for exams, but then we would have essay questions that were more complex that we would allow the students to use the internet for, with the goal of simulating what it's like to be a clinician in clinic where you might have to answer something more complicated, integrate material, reason it, right? Once we had ChatGPT on, and on the radar, it started to feel like this was an exercise in prompt engineering because the goal really wasn't just to take something and copy paste it from the internet, right? It was to integrate, to summarize, to apply, and ChatGPT would do, or AI tools would do all of those steps for the students. So for the time being, we shifted to closed book essays. Now, you could also argue that perhaps we should be testing the students' ability to use prompt engineering because in clinic, maybe that does simulate their practice. We shifted this, so this might be a temporary solution because we're also working on teaching the students explicitly in the curriculum for incoming classes on the use and application of AI tools, but that material, as Jonathan well knows, is in the process of being launched and is not yet live. The other thing we could have done, another thing open to us would be to say to the students that they could use the internet, but not AI. This took us back to two questions. One, how much do we trust our students under the honor code, right? I mean, it's a very real question. And what are the unintended consequences too of that trust? There are times when we do trust the students, and then the students will see a classmate skirting some kind of expectation, but they're being trusted, so they get away with it. And that really crumbles the students' respect and trust of the system, and it can really snowball, as we've seen in certain circumstances. Another issue increasingly is what does it mean to use the internet without using AI when a Google search now gives you an AI answer? Like, how do you draw those lines and make that very clear and explicit for students? And then the third thing is the Stanford Honor Code versus the Stanford AI policy right now, which is something that we're working to grapple with. So by the honor code, which many of you may be familiar with, one of the things we are not allowed to do as instructors is put students in an unduly tempting circumstance to cheat. What this meant during the pandemic, which is wild to me still, was when students were taking an exam at home, it was not allowed to be closed book because the interpretation was that's too unduly tempting for cheating. So any assessments that we do, like weekly quizzes, problem sets in the School of Medicine, are open book by definition unless they're being given in a classroom environment. And all of our exams that are closed book are given in a classroom environment, which by the honor code is still unproctored, but considered to be less tempting when the students are surrounded by their peers. Now, the AI policy simply notes that we are to specify explicitly whether students can use AI. It says nothing about temptation or undue temptation. And so at this point, we feel like it's almost up to us to make this decision. The AI policy, there's not a harmony between the AI policy at Stanford and the honor code policy yet. The AI policy does say that if AI use is forbidden and the student chooses to use it anyways, that's the same as them collaborating with another student. So AI is viewed as a human, helper essentially. But I mean, the real question that I think we have to grapple with is, what constitutes as unduly tempting when AI is truly everywhere, and how much do we want our students using AI? With the question of whether it's unduly tempting, at the risk of sharing just a contained amount of medical school dirty laundry, as I shared, we think that it is unduly tempting. And kind of like this in terms of gray zones, we had an example in one of our courses earlier this year where it was noted that two of the questions on a multiple choice exam had just dropped significantly in their percentage of students who got them right compared to the prior year. So our very enterprising TA looked into this and was like, the material seems to have been taught the exact same way. They took the two multiple choice questions and put them into a couple different AIs. And the AIs got them wrong, choosing the same wrong answer that had become the most popular wrong answer among the students. This was a take-home quiz that was specified to be open book but closed to AI, which again, what does that mean? Now, could we do anything about that? Could we take action against those students? I don't think there's any way possible. Like the things like Turnitin, which are these, new technologies that can try to look and see if something's AI generated. I don't think they have any place in multiple choice. We would have no way of knowing whether a student just happened to choose that wrong answer versus used AI to choose that wrong answer. So while we can make it a teachable moment for our students, we're left with, do we change our policies? Do we allow AI? What do we do about this? The main things we're doing right now in the School of Medicine is we're taking all of our take-home problem sets and making them worth less of grades in many of our courses. And we're introducing more medium stakes assessments where we bring the students into a controlled environment and test them completely closed loop, so more regularly throughout the quarter. Is this the permanent solution? I'm sure it's not. There's so much more that we have to learn. And quite frankly, we do need to be teaching our students how to use AI, but the question is how much and when. And so that's my brief sharing of our experiences thus far in the pre-clerkship space, and I can turn it over to.
Great, just so we did at least read as you guys are plugging in and getting the slide share going.
Yeah.
What was the question where AI has a different answer? Maybe the question was wrong.
It's a really good question. And it was, I would actually have to go back and like look at the specifics, but it was very well supported, the answer that by the course materials, but
Yeah.
it was something that the way it was worded or
Got
something about it that the AI's got wrong. But I agree, the other question is, do we need to look at the questions, right? Like, what's our gold standard? Is it the professor teaching or the AI response? Right? So.
I am sharing over here. I'm not sure. It's wonderful to join you all today. First time for, as far as I was able to kind of look back and audit that we, as the MSPA program, the Master of Science in Physician Assisted Studies program, we've been able to join and kind of share the experience and all of the kind of tandem challenges that we're experiencing together around this topic. I am the Director of Pre-Clerkship Education, and so I've had the tremendous opportunity to be with the MSPA program at Stanford since its inception. And I've been in a lot of different roles, a lot of clinical bedside teaching, mentorship longitudinally before I took on the role of Pre-Clerkship Director. And additionally, my clinical practice has been in trauma surgery, then the cardiovascular ICU for several years, and more recently, primary care population health in the Express Care Clinic. And that sounds like a lot, and it gives a little bit of insight as to how PAs practice and also how our learners have to learn. Is that there's this broad expectation of many different areas of medicine throughout our career. And then I'm co-presenting with my colleague and mentor, Dr. Erip is our Director of Student Scholarship and a Faculty Scholarship as well, and a practicing pharmacist. So these are our general objectives for today. I think we can make it a little bit more informal. I think the discussion will be more valuable to the group overall. But we're really trying to take a look at the implications of AI ethics and student interpretation of like what is the correct this. I was taking a look back at the biomedical and informatics research colloquia or colloquii. Over the last 15 months, there have been 20 topics in this area and a couple that were in medical education as well. And it looks like the last one by Dr. Thomas was in December of 2024. So it was made a point of looking back at the discussion at that point and celebrating the progress as though although it feels slow sometimes because we're really building this as we're driving down the road. It is nice to see that we've made some real headway. The other thing I loved about this lineup is really what it speaks to in terms of our areas of priority, what our ethos are as an institution. We've got a lot in here about how to take this massively powerful tool and use it to make our patients' lives better, to make our community better, to make our education better, to align with the ethical code and equity and make sure that democratization of healthcare with this tool is possible. And there's also some about intellectual property in there as well. So then that's kind of an additional component of what we're going to be talking about today. So diving into the rapids, we really have, I know that people in this room have had AI centered and like recognized as a target for research and policy innovation for a long time. But in education, as we have many other facets of our roles and in clinical practice, like I would say that we're amongst a group that maybe wasn't as on the cutting edge. And so we have this opportunity to utilize this tool, but it may not have come to us as fast as other interdisciplinary professions here. So our initial kind of faculty usage, we dipped our toe in back in fall of 2023. We started looking at like the organizations on campus. It's interesting that human-centered AI, HAI, I was receiving emails from them like for years before I even had like the context to compute that those things were all connected. But we all started kind of taking notes, attending some conferences, and then using like generative AI in limited capacities, like for accuracy, and exploring the potential for assessment building. That's sort of where we started. And then around the same time as when Stanford GPT became available for them in its first iteration, which I've now learned after national conferences with other PA programs, it's like the envy of the nation. Like this is so very rare, and people were like, "You have that?" And it was really exciting to be able to look at how much, like, really interpret that as a point of emphasis. So this institution is investing in this as a future tool that our learners are going to be utilizing. And then in spring of 2024 was when we attended a conference and first became aware of the kind of the direction of using AI to democratize healthcare and specifically tequity. And so we started kind of conceptualizing what combining equitable access to healthcare and for information around health and the use of tech could look like. But we didn't take that, that initial framework of curriculum forward because we were like, there are many other things in our curriculum to kind of investigate. And we're always guided by our accrediting bodies as to what priorities we need to place. And so far, we don't have anything in our accrediting documentation or in those entities that is going to guide us on how AI needs to be integrated into their education. But in the fall of 2024, we were moved into action by the presence of an assignment turned in that we were quite certain had the use of AI. And that's when we discovered, really dissecting the AI policy at the university level versus our handbook and the honor code and how those things interface. It is incredibly challenging to understand how to enforce the suspicion of the use of AI. And so ultimately we had a discussion with the student. They were quite honest. We had they were unaware that the assistance of AI in an assignment, like a writing assignment, would have been constituted as dishonest. And it's interesting because that student began at a time when we didn't even have a reference to the AI policy in the handbook that they originally signed. So we really were stuck in a situation where we couldn't enforce it, but we took it as an opportunity to say, we need to better inform our students. So we sent out an email pointing out the policy, and to which everybody freaked out. All the students were like, "Oh no!" And at that same time, we developed our first lectures around the use of AI in medical education and in medicine, and that was October and November for our second and first year class. We also attended a conference and went to all of the AI topics and realized that although we have all these tremendous resources, we have a lot of opportunity to step further into to the educational space with leadership in AI. And then a big part of what came from that conference also was that we learned that our students are putting themselves at risk for violating their own intellectual property, for putting their own independent work on their thesis, all their own research into an AI tool to help with editing, and then losing that as their own intellectual property. It becomes then a part of the system that teaches the model, and they could then seem like they're plagiarizing when it's their own work, when it eventually does become published. So pre-published work being placed into these AI models was like a new fear of ours. So we were certain that our students were not aware of or kind of had at the forefront. So we worked towards a policy. As a part of that lecture and that time frame in the fall of 2024, we also had a student that has taken a tremendous interest in this as a topic and the way students are utilizing generative AI and their perceptions of it. So that's what my colleague is going to move forward and tell you about.
All right. For you, if I just dig a little deeper, what was it about that student submission that something looks wrong? I don't know, can you describe that at all?
It was the precision. It was like it ended up being an assignment regarding a reflection on a human experience, and it was so precise, and it was so many words, and it was just like every sentence was structured so perfectly. When you would have imagined that there would have been a human interaction recounted in that, like that was not an assignment that was about describing like imperfect grammar and format. You know, it was more about like, tell us what happened when you had this human experience.
Well,
And it didn't mimic that.
too formalized, too
Yeah.
polished. And then it begged the question, that's the one you detected something was off.
Right,
So how many have we not detected or don't even realize, and can we tell the difference?
you nailed it. That's exactly what we're talking about. Like, how do we make an example of this person when we haven't even checked others?
Yeah, great. I think we have Dr. Erip and we'll keep the conversation going.
Yep. So I had the pleasure of working on this project with my MSPA student advisee, Raji Ganapathy. And together we explored the use of generative AI among PA and pharmacy students in the United States. So today we'll delve into how these technologies are being integrated into medical education and the perceptions surrounding their use. So as we dive into the background, it's important to note that many academic programs are still figuring out how to guide students in using AI effectively. Recent advances in generative AI have raised interest in its potential benefits for teaching and learning in medical education. For example, creating simulated cases or scenarios, creating practice exam questions. However, its use may also raise questions about ethics, efficacy, and the technology's broader impact on learning. There's a noticeable gap in policies regarding AI roles in academia. So prior studies have highlighted a lack of established AI standards among students and faculty, which raises questions about how AI impacts student learning and success. Our research aims to fill some of this gap by examining how health professional students perceive and interact with generative AI, such as ChatGPT. Our study had three main objectives. The first one was to examine the prevalence of generative AI use among US PA and pharmacy students in the didactic setting as well as in the clerkship setting. Second, we wanted to identify key reasons for generative AI use and investigate potential factors associated with its use. And then lastly, we wanted to analyze students' perceptions regarding the value and do they feel it's trustworthy, the responses they're getting. So to achieve our objectives, we conducted a cross-sectional survey between December 2024 to February 2025 via Qualtrics, and this was a 40-item survey. And for inclusion criteria, it consisted of full-time students who were in a accredited PA program or a pharmacy school program in the US, and they had to be at least 18 years old. And then we received IRB approval in October 2024 from Stanford University. For statistical analysis, continuous variables were reported as means with standard deviation. I'm gonna skip this slide.
No.
And then 258 students initially filled out the survey. We excluded 24 because they didn't finish it till the end. And then we excluded 6 because they did not meet inclusion criteria. So we actually surveyed 228 students for our final analytical cohort. About 70% were PA students, 30% were pharmacy students. So a total of 228 students completed the survey with a mean age of about 26 years of age. Majority were female. I'll say the demographics similar to like a pharmacy school demographic, a little bit more Asians compared to the PA demographic. Majority of our respondents came from the South or the West. And then regarding prevalence, so a vast majority of students are using generative AI in the didactic setting. And then up to about 2 in 5 students are using it in the clinical setting, so on rotations. And then regarding perceptions, majority of students found AI-based tools enhance their learning effectiveness as well as their academic productivity. However, when it came to trusting the AI responses, 42% of students trusted AI to consistently provide accurate responses. So what were some of the common platforms used? So the most common by far was the free version of ChatGPT, but students also used Gemini as well as the paid version of ChatGPT. In the didactic setting, reasons for use were to seek explanations of broad concepts or topics. So for example, maybe clarification of a disease state, creating study materials, so outlines or summaries of lectures, creating flashcards or review documents. And then also at least half of students created their own exam questions. So it's not uncommon for a student to upload an exam into ChatGPT and say, hey, create 20 therapeutic exam questions for me, and then use that as practice. Reasons for use in the clinical setting. So these are students who are on rotations. One was explaining clinical concepts and topics. Second was clinical decision support. And then third was medical literature research and evidence-based medicine.
Maybe in our discussion, we could come back to that clinical decision support. I think that's a hot topic.
Yep. All right, so we wanted to figure out, what are some, not risk factors, but factors that may promote generative AI use. So we found that being male was 3 times more likely to use generative AI, as well as pharmacy students more likely than PA students when we did a logistic regression. So for discussion, vast majority of PA and pharmacy students report generative AI use, and it's likely that medical students are using that as well in a didactic setting. And a substantial number of students are also using it in the clinical setting as well. Many view it as effective and valuable. However, there is skepticism about the trustworthiness of the information you're getting. So I said about 42% of students consistently trust AI responses, which is actually kind of high. I thought it was going to be lower than that. But I thought maybe 10% of students might consistently trust AI. So 40% is actually a lot. So that means a lot of our students are maybe using ChatGPT and saying, you know what, this response is accurate. I'm going to go with that, maybe present that to my preceptor, or maybe relay that to the medical team. And we all know that anyone who's used ChatGPT for medical purposes knows that it's not fully accurate. I just saw an article last month in the American Journal of Health Systems Pharmacists. They looked at 84 drug information questions from ChatGPT, compared it to a drug information center run by pharmacists. And ChatGPT was 50% accurate. Not the best accuracy. Limitations on our study. Despite sending our survey out to over 200 PA programs and over 15 pharmacy school programs, we had a relatively lower response rate than anticipated. We had about 200 plus students. Any survey has recall bias, but we try to limit responses to the last 12 months. And then surveys can lack more in-depth insight. So I think another study might be doing a qualitative study where you're actually doing a semi-structured interview with students on their use of AI. And then we would love to gain insight from other healthcare professional students. So physician, medical students, nursing, dentistry. In our IRB, we actually made it very broad. So if there's anyone interested in collaborating with us and wanting to maybe survey medical students, would love to have you guys on board and take part in another arm of our study. All right, so in conclusion, majority of PA and pharmacy students are using generative AI. Students think positively of it, and students are going to continue using it. So what should we do? Should we ban AI? Is that realistic? Or if we ban AI, students are still going to use it anyway. So I think the key is, we know AI exists, but we should probably teach our students how to use it safely, effectively, so that we don't jeopardize patient care.
I had a couple of studies that I added in here just because I thought they spoke to kind of the broader topic of how do you achieve that understanding of ethical AI use. I can just keep them in here, and the broad strokes, like what I think we really need to talk about in medical education, and then we've started to talk about in the working group and steering committee, is like having a policy that is clear and addresses specifically ethical use, that we can't leave this open to interpretation. We need to be very defined in our own minds as well. Like as we are all the recipients of this education of how to use AI as well, we have to ramp up our own knowledge enough that we can make a clear, decisive guidance towards our students. And then governance, just having oversight and accountability. It's really challenging to understand how we can hold our students accountable when we have policies that are not as clear as they can be. But even once we get our clear policies, as Dr. Miller-Kuhlmann was mentioning, the enforcement of it, when there's temptation is like a factor of our own honor code. We have an opportunity to, I think, greater clarify that as well. And then the curriculum, anything that we do needs to be kind of competency-based. These tools are moving so fast. There's so many new ones and they're iterating so quickly, and that's like how they're designed. So instead of teaching to specific patterns or specific tools, we have to teach a competency base. They have to understand how to utilize these things, how to evaluate them critically themselves, and how to stay on course with like the proper ways of using it, whether it's any tool under the sun and however powerful they become. I also think we need to kind of address the fact that with our students that the use of these is not without its own environmental considerations, that we're seeing more use than we ever anticipated, and that has like world implications that we should also make them aware of when they're just thinking it's some easy tool to like help them with study materials. So just something to consider. Oh yeah, we also talked a little bit about our thesis guidelines development in here. I think we might, Dr. Chen, how are you feeling about time?
We're good, we're good.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, so as the director of student and faculty scholarship, I oversee the student thesis projects. So in early December 2024, we drafted the MSPA AI thesis guidelines to ensure we try to stay ahead of the game, or at least on pace with current technologies. So by mid-December, the guidelines were sent to MSPA leadership, principal faculty, the thesis advisors, and our learning specialists to review and edit. And then in January, we sent out the AI thesis guidelines for formal voting for approval. And on February 12th, the AI thesis guidelines were approved, and the next day, we posted the guidelines for our students. And I'll go over the guidelines on the next slide. So below are just some highlights. The actual guidelines are more in depth for the students. But the first one states use AI as a supplement, not a replacement. So AI should enhance your work, not replace original thoughts and analysis. Number two is acknowledge AI use. So we're telling our students that if you are using AI, reference it in both the methods and acknowledgement sections. Number three is properly cite AI. So best is not to avoid like quoting AI, but if you happen to do that, there are APA recommendations on how to cite that. Number four is protect your intellectual property. So this is the big thing. Even as a faculty member who submits publications, manuscripts for publications, I'm very careful not to copy and paste my own work into public, like ChatGPT. I definitely will use the Stanford GPT if I wanted to make maybe edits or clarifications on any of my writing, because you don't want your own work to be just distributed out to the public, and next thing you know, someone in the public asks a question and then your information basically gets sent to them as the response. Number five is verify information. So always check the accuracy of AI generated statements to avoid misinformation. Number six is avoid inputting confidential data. So we definitely think about HIPAA from this regard. So never input sensitive information into public AI services. Use the Stanford Secure GPT for that purpose. So it could be either patient data or even maybe if you're doing like student research, like FERPA, we're thinking about FERPA issues as well. Number seven, use critical thinking. So evaluate AI outputs critically and be aware of potential biases with AI. Number eight is stay up to date on guidelines. So keep informed about the latest university policies on AI use in research. And I had links for the students to our Responsible AI at Stanford website, as well as the report of the AI at Stanford Advisory Committee, a report that came out in January. Number nine is get feedback and collaborate. So discuss AI use with your thesis advisor as well as your research team. And then lastly, consult the journal, or if you're presenting at a professional meeting like a poster, make sure you look at the AI policies to make sure that you're in compliance with those policies. And that's all we have.
Those
Great.
policies also kind of speak to the fact that we have adopted a plan to, as faculty, be very transparent with our students. Like we're using AI for certain aspects of our job that can be done more efficiently with AI. And so I've started, if I use it to make an image or a table or a graph in a lecture, I cite it so that they're aware, and I call it out that like this is something that you can use to develop study materials from, but but always checking every single input. The radical transparency. So knowing, like recognizing, we're encouraging them to be honest with us by being honest with them, that we are using it as well.
Oh, okay, Mary, questions, go.
In the project that you had talked about the Gen AI use in PA and pharma students, I saw in the console diagram there was a statement that said that exclude students who have never heard about AI. Were there any students like that?
I have to double check the data, but I'd say majority of students have heard of it. Yeah.
It's interesting, in our last admissions process, we had a question about it, and there were some students that were like, what? And I was like, is this performative? I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine somebody, like a student not having heard of AI.
But that was also like more than half a year ago, right? So now I feel like it's, as the months go by, like everyone's sort of
Around that pace. Should we sit down on the panel area or?
I'm sure, I feel like wherever you're most comfortable, I'm just gonna keep some of the discussion going. You found a substantial difference between like didactics versus coaches. One thing, can you explain the distinction between what those two phases of training are like? And why do you think there was such a difference in usage?
I would say that the amount of time that students, just from the perspective of the didactic side, the amount of time that students have like dedicated solo time available to kind of deep dive into a topic is much more substantial in your pre-clerkship phase and the didactic phase. They might not have felt that they have like a tool available on their phone that they can like quick check. But just-in-time learning in the clerkship space is actually like a pretty good use of AI if you're using the correct tool and you have like an understanding of prompt engineering. So I would anticipate there's going to be more use in the clerkship side.
But yeah, this was sort of the self-recall. It wasn't like percentage of time used, just like, have you ever used it? It's like 60% had never used any AI tool in their clerkships. It almost seems like it's like trying to practice up-to-date without the internet or something.
And now UpToDate has an integration with AI too.
Inevitably, because they have to, otherwise they were gonna get wiped out.
Yeah, I would say the response is probably lower than anticipated. Like the actual rates are probably higher. But I do a lot of like performance enhancing drug research or anabolic steroid research where some people just don't want to admit it because they feel like they might get in trouble.
I also imagine that when you see the students who are using AI at such a large level in the pre-clerkship, as they go to clerkship, I imagine that number is going to change dramatically.
Thank you for this great talk. And my question is about, do you think we require, actually you talked about the evaluation of the students, and I would like to know, do we need to change the evaluation of the students? Because maybe in past we asked some questions and the students try to answer this question and show their knowledge about this question. Do you think now we need to change the evaluation of the students, and maybe what questions should be asked and what questions is not required to ask in this age of the AI? What do you think about this evaluation criteria now?
I think it's such a good question, and I think we're actively grappling with that. So to what extent do we change? I think it's about our goals, right? Like we have a goal for our students to be responsible users of AI. And when we're testing that goal, we need to develop, right, the exam that tests that objective. But when we're saying what medical knowledge is in your head, so you can pass your licensing exams, or so that if you're away from a computer, you can still help a patient. I think for that, we have to change the setting. We might not have to change the questions, but we have to help the students to not use AI in that setting, right? I think that both are important. And I'm not sure if that quite fits at your question. Do you have other thoughts? Yeah.
When I had the lecture with them in the fall, I was describing that I have a concern that the use of AI is happening so fast, and people are so like delighted by it, that this is going to become the new norm, and people that are proficient in AI are absolutely going to replace people who are not. But this is also going to become our new efficiency set point. So that amplifies their temptation so much more, but they're doing it so fast that they're not integrating, they're not synthesizing their learning. So when they're studying in certain ways, if they're not being really intentional about it, I worry that they're gonna get less medical knowledge in their head, even though they've gone over vastly more amounts of information. And so I think, yeah, the ability to isolate them and make them critically think is going to be like a primary endpoint. We still will have to have multiple choice exams because that's how their boards are. And so we've kind of moved more towards like more complex clinical questions in our multiple choice. Like they have to have a minute per question by the time they sit for their boards, but our questions have gotten a lot longer with a lot more clinical information to synthesize so you can arrive at an answer.
A lot more case-based questions that require, like on the Bloom's taxonomy, more analysis, more synthesis.
Can the AI still answer it?
Oh, for sure.
We're using exam software, then they can't.
Yeah.
But we want to give them enough pieces of information to make them get to that medicine in their head.
We do test the students, to your question, though. We use a browser that is locked down from the internet when they open the exam. Now, does that stop them from getting out their phone? Hopefully, when they are not at home and they are in a big lecture
Yeah, so you
hall.
said it's still unproctored.
But it's still unproctored, right? I mean, because by Stanford was looking at proctoring. There were some pilots of that. I don't actually know where they went, but as of right now, under the honor code, we are not allowed to proctor.
They're not
exams.
allowed
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Unless there is like a national standard, so when we do NDME licensing type exams that must be proctored, like the student shelf exams, then we are allowed to because it's external to Stanford, but with internal exams, we don't proctor them based on the honor code.
Pretty interesting.
I have two questions. One, you know, for a lot of professions, there's a lot of discussion about how trying to retrofit a job or a workflow and then thinking about it like, oh, how do we put Gen AI into this? Or how do we replace this part of the workflow with Gen AI is the wrong way to do it, right? You're supposed to like start from basics. What do you want to get done? And how would you design a process or workflow based on that? So you ever think with all of this coming online, are the current set of educators the right set of people to think about what are the skills required for medicine? I mean, it's a very unfriendly question, obviously. And then it's like, that's kind of question one. And then question two is, it also strikes me that this also puts, like this whole issue of how to educate students puts a lot of onus on current educators because it's about thinking of how do you redesign materials, how do you redesign evaluation methods? Does everything have to become Socratic now? And like are even most educators good at that if you didn't train in that yourself? So there's like, they're kind of related, right? Like there's a lot of pressure that goes back to the educators, which didn't exist before. And maybe not educators want to throw themselves into that.
Yeah.
I think that's why
a big question.
and I think that's why important that like educators like stay on top of it, go to like CMEs or go to conferences that talk about AI in education to kind of get ahead of the game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in general, even though this is very much a sea change, medical knowledge has been evolving so rapidly over the past decades that our educators are already somewhat facile about the fact that their work is never done. Like on occasion when we have an educator that's like, this is a finished product, this set of lectures, we're like, sure about that? Because it's probably not. And like, if you don't change it, it will become stale within like 3 years for sure, it would be my estimation. So I think in some ways, our educators probably are like prepared to continue to roll with the changes. Our current set of educators also like had to go to completely virtual during the pandemic, which was also a huge shift in how we taught everything like clinical medicine and how to examine a patient, but we can't have everyone in the same room. Like, so I feel like we probably do have the right people to a large extent, but to your question of like, what are the right goals for the students? I don't know that we know that yet, right? Like we're talking right now, we still believe like deeply in our cores that we need to be teaching students to be critical thinkers and that they need to have some basic amount of knowledge in their brains to work with, to do that thinking with, right? While applying these tools. I don't know that that's going to be the way we think in 10 years. I don't know, right? Like, do we really need students to be critical thinkers? I hope the answer is yes, like deep in my soul, but I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very good question. Yeah.
Like turn to an online question, David Jimenez Morales or a comment, go ahead. And Eric Strong will follow up with you.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yes, right. All right. Yeah. So, thank you very much for your presentation. It's a very interesting topic and very challenging. So, I was wonder, as you guys were describing some of the cases, it might turns out that teachers or professors, with the goal of trying to create questions that the AI is not able to solve correctly. So we might end up asking the students two really hard questions just because we saw that when we were checking with ChatGPT was getting the answer wrong. So I wonder, this can be this can backfire at the same time, make things more complicated, right?
Oh yeah, I don't think the goal is to make questions that ChatGPT can't answer. I think the goal is to put students in situations where they aren't using ChatGPT and are tempted to use ChatGPT if we want them answering it independently. I agree with you. I absolutely think that would backfire.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't expect them to be machines. We can't do that to them. And we hope they don't expect that of us. You're right though about like faculty. We go to these medical education and AI conferences and the experts that are presenting are all like in their primary years of clinical education and clinical practice. And it's like the experts are the younger generation.
Mhm.
And so it's a really, it can be uncomfortable to say like, we're sort of learning alongside, but we're also using like the established, experienced critical thinking skills. And I agree with you. I hope that they won't outsource their ability to critically think. I started thinking about clinical reasoning. I'm like, oh my gosh, in those small groups are they using it on their computer?
Oh, for sure.
Yes, for sure. Like, wow, we're getting like a 4-hour like class and they're like done in an hour now. I bet. So. But yeah, it's a real challenge to add on top of the workload that is immense as an educator and could deter people from entering education.
Hopefully not.
I think for me, like, if they're using ChatGPT to answer a response, I'm hoping the students, and we're teaching the students to do the due diligence to verify that response. And then knowing where to look up the appropriate resources to see, is this answer that ChatGPT gave me accurate and correct? Because a lot of times, ChatGPT gives you something called hallucinations, right? So, or they call it confabulations, where even references are completely made up. If you actually say, hey, give me a response with references, I actually clicked on the reference, it's a bogus reference, right? So
that's reminding me, one of the fun things we've done in some of our classes is we actually gave the students a ChatGPT answer to an essay question we wanted to ask them, and then we asked them to critically analyze the answer. And the students were so cute. They were like, chatbot, you did such a good job on this part, but you could have thought a little bit more about X, Y, Z. But it
You want to hurt his feelings.
right, it was an interesting way to get around it. Yeah.
Eric Strong has, I know, has thought about this deeply and he's worried. I think he has a dark view of where the field is going and thinks that we are personally destroying the future of medicine. I don't know. I'm putting words about Eric. Tell us what should we think about?
Okay. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So I'm just gonna read a comment I dropped in the webinar chat. So, I have a kid in high school now, and that has made me acutely aware recently of how prevalent cheating is at the high school level using ChatGPT predominantly, but other tools as well. And it's to the point that like as my son tells it, and as his friends tell it, literally every student in the school will cheat occasionally on some assignment or even exams using ChatGPT or something similar. And it's to the point that it's normalizing cheating. It's not just normalizing the use of ChatGPT, it's normalizing cheating more broadly, to the point that I worry that even if at the medical school and PA school and pharmacy schools, even if we figure out a way to mitigate the use of ChatGPT in a way that is seen as unfair, if the students are coming to us already as adults, having 8+ years of normalized cheating, is there idea of academic integrity more generally, more broadly, going to be so challenging for us to deal with, that even if we come up with a solution for ChatGPT, use and a policy about ChatGPT, it's just the idea of these students not seeing anything wrong with cheating more generally. Is that going to be an issue for us? Do you think that's exceptionally paranoid, or is that seem grounded? And are there strategies that we can be using now to mitigate what I think is going to be a flood of this problem in 4, 5, 6 years?
Oh, you're speaking all my fears. Because we don't have control over that space, right? I mean, I feel like we could also turn that question back on you as someone who, per Dr. Chen's point, has thought about this a lot. I mean, I think we absolutely have to address it, but it has to be addressed way before students get to medical school, right? Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I don't have any concept of what the AI policies look like in a primary school kind of setting, or even like an undergraduate education.
Right, it's moved too fast. They haven't had a chance to even figure it out, right? The human institution moves too slowly for this very disruptive change to happen kind of overnight.
Yeah.
And on what is the honor code? Like, I think honor is very important, but the honor code is you're just depending on human normative behavior, which
that would
is there because it's not going to be, it's going to be broken basically at some point. It's a strange dynamic.
Well, that you were kind of describing, we don't proctor because then otherwise we're enforcing the honor code and rather than believing that students will follow it.
But we know that they won't all follow it, and that's really hard. Like, we want to believe, but we know that they don't all follow it, right? That's like in any group of 100 students, there's going to be some percentage that don't follow it, even among our amazing MSBA and medical students and Pharm students who are fantastic human beings. Like, there is some part of human behavior that if they justify it, or however you want to look at it. So.
And doesn't that actually, with the undue temptation, I really like that concept because ironically, you will thus punish those who are the most honest. The ones who are most trying to do what you're giving the guidance on, you're actually actively punish them the worst rather than the mitigated one.
And even in Dr. Strong's example, you're punishing the people that still see it as cheating, where the terrifying tidal wave is that are these people not going to see it as cheating anymore? Because it is not only so normative, but like encouraged in all of these like advanced jobs, like being proficient in AI is like now a value.
Sure. Ooh, we'll get to that deep question of what is the thing to evaluate. Matt Eisenberg, do you want to make your comment? And then I'll see if we can get to David Preston, maybe squeeze in one or two more in the room. Matt Eisenberg, go ahead.
Sure, can you hear me?
You're good.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I was just going to ask about how do we account for the quality of the training model, the quality of the content that the model is trained on. So, and the example that I put in the chat is that at Stanford Healthcare, we were early adopters of AI for responding drafts for secure messaging. And our early experience, as I understand it, was that our pharmacy colleagues found it to be highly accurate because the internet data on pharmaceuticals is generally pretty good. So it may work for that specialty, but that was not the case for a lot of other medical specialties. So in some ways, a lot of this is how good is the model to begin with? How good is the content that it's built on? What should we do to drive the industry to use better content to fit the specialty need? And then how do we drive that into training? Those are really tough questions.
Totally agree. Those are really tough questions.
I mean, that could be a thing like, for the students, like, trust but verify, hallucination, confabulation can happen. Although at some points when you ask general questions, it is right like 90% of the time. So it's like, why do you, it's actually a waste of your time to double check everything.
Yeah.
But maybe they should be aware in different domains, that's not always the case. And how could you know the answer was wrong unless you already knew, unless you have been trained and thought about and learned it.
Right. And I guess for the research, it may end up being, should we be doing this by specialty? Would it be really very different for the pharmacist than it would be for the PA students? Because actually the models work differently. And just a thought as we go forward.
And that brings up a couple of thoughts for me too. With my initial uses of Stanford GPT, I was like, this is wrong most of the time. And it would like argue a wrong answer. Like I was asking a cardiac valve question, and then when you give it like a resource and you say, no, this is the correct answer, it's like, I'm sorry.
I was just kidding. You're right.
So because it's gated, it's not learning from the same degree of data, the same pool of data as ChatGPT. So the temptation is there then also to use something that is like unprotected and not like validated or gated at all. And then the second thing I talk to the students about is like, I understand the immense pressure they're under, like the expectations of their time and attention is so much more than we had to deal with growing up. And like having already learned in the digital era and then now adding this component of it too, like the expectation of what they're gonna know is going to like ramp up exponentially as well. So I actually talked to them about using AI to using AI for good, like for other things in their life that they don't have to expend mental energy on, like simple things, like meal planning and like making lists and like drafting emails that are not like containing information that shouldn't be shared, but just like don't just think about it as like the only way I can study. Instead, like offload other time that you could free up for studying in the established, validated methods. I don't know if they're doing that. I thought it was kind of funny, like to think about how to use it, but.
And so we're right at the hour, so we're gonna break down for us, have a squeeze question like student perspective on what do they think. I want to try to tie just something, and maybe this as a question more than a thing we can answer. What is foundational learning versus maybe learning to use the tool is what you should do, or is there something foundational you still have to learn? Otherwise, you can't really learn to use the tool properly. And maybe a contrast, like, why do we even need medical knowledge? Why do you study a book? If you come to my magic show on Saturday, I'm gonna literally show I've memorized pocket medicine. Is that cool? Or what's the point? You could just go search them up to date any minute you want to. I don't know, you don't have to answer that, but just to think about what is the foundational thing you actually think students do need to learn?
It's such a good, that's a good note to end on because it's such a philosophical question that I think we can all chew on it because there's clearly not a straightforward answer.
What is life?
Okay, so come back to our symposium on June 4th. We'll have a whole afternoon dedicated to this and many more themes. And thanks everyone, and thanks to all of our presenters. All right, take care, everybody. Be back next week.